The destroyer was the safest ship in the United States Navy. At least, that was the official position in 1942. The Navy's own doctrine classified destroyers as highly survivable combatants. Personnel assignment boards treated destroyer billets as desirable postings. Competitive, even. That was the official version. Between December 1941 and September 1945, the United States Navy lost more than 70 destroyers. 19 of those were Fletcher-class alone. Another 6 Fletchers were damaged beyond any hope of repair. 1 in 5 never came home. The men who climbed aboard Fletcher-class destroyers in 1942 were stepping onto one of the most dangerous platforms the Navy put to sea. But what made it hell wasn't the enemy. It was everything that happened before the first shell was fired. A Fletcher-class destroyer measured 376 feet from bow to stern. Displacement at full combat load ran to approximately 2,500 tons. That sounds substantial until you consider the ship it was expected to screen, protect, and fight alongside. The Iowa-class battleships it sometimes escorted displaced 57,000 tons. A Fletcher alongside an Iowa was the nautical equivalent of a border collie running alongside a freight train. And into those 376 feet, the Navy packed 329 men. Officers, gunners, rearmen, signalmen, engineers, cooks, pharmacists, mates. Every one of them had a bunk, a locker, and a battle station. The living space per man was roughly equivalent to a modern prison cell. Except a prison cell doesn't roll 30 degrees in heavy weather. And a prison cell doesn't have a fire room underneath it operating at 650 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. Now, inside that ship, there was a hierarchy of suffering. The men on deck, the gunners, the bridge crew, the lookouts, they at least could see the horizon. They could feel the wind. They knew whether it was day or night. Below the waterline, none of that applied. The machinists, the firemen, the water tenders, they lived and worked in a sealed steel box. No windows, no natural light, no view of anything except gauges, pipes, and the men standing next to them. And then there was the heat. A Fletcher-class destroyer carried 4 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, split between 2 fire rooms. Those boilers generated superheated steam at 650 pounds per square inch and 850 degrees Fahrenheit. That steam drove 2 General Electric geared turbines producing 60,000 shaft horsepower. Enough power to push 500 tons of steel through the water at 37 knots. That is roughly 43 miles per hour faster than almost anything else afloat. The men who maintained those boilers worked in spaces where the ambient temperature routinely exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit during tropical operations. One veteran, a throttleman on a Pacific Fleet destroyer, recalled temperatures reaching 130 degrees at the engine room throttle station. That figure is worth pausing on. A healthy adult begins to experience heat exhaustion at sustained exposure above 104 degrees. The engineering watch was 4 hours long. In those conditions, men lost pounds per shift. Not gradually. Visibly. Salt tablets were mandatory. Heat stroke happened. Men collapsed, were carried out, cooled down, and sent back to work. Which is, by any measure, an extraordinary thing to ask of a human being. The Fletchers had only one distilling plant. All fresh water aboard for drinking, for cooking, for the boilers came from that single unit. And the boilers took priority. The boilers always took priority. If fresh water ran short, the crew went on water hours. Showers were restricted. Drinking water was rationed. The men washed in salt water, which left skin raw and clothing stiff. And when the shift ended, when a machinist's mate climbed out of 130-degree heat, he went to sleep. Or tried to. The Fletcher-class destroyer did not have enough bunks for every man aboard. The solution was hot racking. 2 men shared one bunk. When one came off watch, the other's shift was starting. The mattress was still warm from the previous occupant. The spaces were not quiet. Turbines ran continuously. Ventilation fans ran continuously. At high speed, the hull itself vibrated, the entire ship shook, and because the Fletcher was a flush deck design, she flexed in heavy seas in ways that larger ships did not. Men described it as trying to sleep inside a washing machine. Personal space was a locker smaller than a school bag. Privacy did not exist. You ate in shifts, slept in shifts, and used the head in shifts. On a ship this size, there was no place to be alone. Not for 1 minute of any day for the entire deployment. Those were the peacetime problems. The things that happened every day whether the enemy showed up or not. And the men endured them for months at a time. Fletcher-class destroyers deployed for stretches that could run 6 months or longer without returning to a major port. Food quality declined as refrigerated stores ran out. Fresh provisions gave way to canned rations. Canned rations gave way to whatever the cooks could improvise from what was left. The pharmacist's mate was the closest thing to a doctor aboard a destroyer. Not an actual physician, a pharmacist's mate, trained in first aid, minor procedures, and the dispensing of medication. For burns, which were the most common injury in the fire rooms, he had ointment and bandages. For a broken bone, he had splints. For anything requiring surgery, the nearest hospital was often 1,000 miles away. And then the ship went to war. April Okinawa sute patruzec shichinch. The waters off Okinawa. The United States Navy had established 16 radar picket stations around the island. Each station was manned by a destroyer, positioned 40 to 75 miles from the main fleet. The job was simple. Detect incoming Japanese aircraft on radar. Report their position. Provide early warning. The catch was also simple. The picket destroyers were the first ships the Japanese pilots saw. And by April 1945, those pilots were not turning around. Of 149 Allied ships hit by kamikazes during the Battle of Okinawa, 88 were destroyers and destroyer types. The sailors on those picket ships called it the graveyard shift. They were not being dramatic. Now, here is what combat looked like from below the waterline. The general quarters alarm sounds. Every man on the ship goes to his battle station. For the men in the engine room and fire rooms, the battle station is exactly where they already are. They are already below. They are already sealed in. The only change is that the hatches above them are now dogged shut. Watertight integrity. That is the reason. If a torpedo or a bomb or a kamikaze strikes below the waterline, the flooding must be contained. The hatches stay shut. The men below stay below. A machinist's mate at his throttle station in the forward engine room is now entirely dependent on the sound-powered telephone for information. He cannot see anything. He hears the 5-inch guns firing through the steel above him. He feels the ship change course, hard rudder, the deck tilting. He hears the 30mm Bofors. Closer now, a faster rhythm than the 5-inch. And if a kamikaze hits, he hears that too. But he does not know where. He does not know how bad it is. He knows only that the ship has shuddered. That something has changed in the sound of the machinery. That the phone talker is relaying information that may or may not be accurate. On April Shasa, 1945, The first mass kamikaze attack at Okinawa, over 350 kamikaze aircraft descended on the American fleet. The destroyer USS Bush, on radar picket station number 1, was hit by 3 separate kamikazes over the course of several hours. Most of the men killed in kamikaze strikes on destroyers died below deck. Superheated steam killed them. When a kamikaze penetrated the hull near a fire room, the steam lines ruptured. Steam at 850 degrees Fahrenheit filled the compartment in seconds. The men inside had no warning and no escape. The official account of USS Cassin Young at Okinawa records that the men killed in her kamikaze hit were trapped in the forward fire room as it filled with superheated steam. 22 dead. 45 wounded. They fought the entire war without ever seeing the enemy. That is the part that doesn't make it into most accounts. The engine room crew, the fire room crew, they experienced combat entirely through sound, vibration, and the voice on the sound-powered phone. They controlled 60,000 horsepower. They kept the ship moving. They kept the generators running. And they did it sealed inside a steel box below the waterline, knowing that a direct hit meant flooding or steam or fire in a space with one narrow ladder and a dogged hatch above them. Engine room crews had the lowest survival rate of any position on a warship during the Second World War. Lower than gun crews. Lower than bridge personnel. Lower than the men in the open on deck. And the men who survived a sinking were in the water. And in the Pacific, the water was not empty. Abandoning ship from the engine room meant climbing up, through a narrow trunk, in the dark because power was likely gone, with the ship listing because that is what a sinking ship does, past steam lines that may or may not be intact. If you made it to the main deck, you went over the side, into the Pacific, which in tropical latitudes runs about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to sustain life, warm enough to sustain sharks. If you went over in the North Atlantic and destroyers operated there too, running convoy escort the water was 28 to 40 degrees. Survival time without a life raft was measured in minutes, not hours. The surface of the water around a sinking ship was typically covered in fuel oil. Black, thick, and in some cases burning. Men swallowed it. It covered their eyes. It filled their lungs if they went under. Now here are the numbers. More than 70 American destroyers were lost during the war. At Okinawa alone, 10 destroyers were sunk on radar picket duty. The total American naval casualties at Okinawa killed and wounded exceeded 9,000 men. That is more than the Navy lost at Pearl Harbor. 1 in 5 Fletcher-class destroyers was lost or damaged beyond repair. Think about those odds for a moment. A crew of 329 men going to sea on a ship class with a 14% loss rate. Those are not numbers anyone mentioned at the recruitment office. And here is the number from the hook again. The Navy classified the destroyer as a highly survivable combatant. Now you know what that classification was worth. Jackson K. Parker went to sea aboard the USS Mervine, a destroyer, before his 21st birthday. He served as a machinist's mate. He went through the entire war in the Atlantic Theater, North Africa, Sicily, the convoy runs. He worked below deck, in the engine room, maintaining the machinery that kept his ship alive. After the war, Parker made the Navy his career. He spent decades working on ships. He rose through the ranks. He became an authority on destroyer engineering. He could tell you the steam pressure of any boiler he'd ever operated. He could tell you the sound a turbine makes when it's running right and the slightly different sound it makes when it isn't. He rarely spoke about the specific moments. The moments when the general quarters alarm sounded and the hatches closed above him, The moments when the 5-inch guns fired and the hull rang like a bell, and the only thing he could do was watch his gauges and wait. He spoke instead about the heat, the noise, the salt tablets, the mattress that was always warm from someone else. The small details that don't make it into the histories because they are not dramatic enough to tell. But those were the details that lasted. Those were the details that followed the men home. 329 men on a ship 376 feet long. Most of them were under 25. Some of them were 17. They served for years in conditions that would be considered inhumane in any other context. They did it because they were told to, and because the men next to them were doing it, and because there was a war on and somebody had to stand the watch. The ones who came home did not, as a rule, talk about it in any detail. When they did, they talked about the small things. The coffee in the engine room, the way the ship moved in a following sea, the smell of fuel oil that never entirely washed out. They did not say it was hell. They said it was quite something. Or they said nothing at all. That's what it was really like. Not the version in the textbooks. Not the version in the movies. The version the men who were there would have told you if you'd asked, and if they were willing to remember.